So today I want to talk about vaults for custodians. I'm Sean. I'm a product manager at Anchorage Digital. Anchorage is a Bitcoin custodian and a federally chartered bank. Although this is titled for institutions, I think it's important to point out at the beginning that it can also be done by individuals. I think one of the powerful pieces of upgrades to Bitcoin is that it could shrink the size of institutions and kind of change the view that everything we're doing has to just be for self-custody. Self-custody is incredibly important, but it's not the only thing that people are going to use Bitcoin for as adoption grows. So in this presentation, I'm going to start off by going through BIP 345, which is OpVault. There are many ways to make a vault, but that is just one of the most narrowly defined opcodes, which is why I wanted to look at it. And then I'm going to look at some of the use cases for it. All right, so what is reactive security? This is not an official definition, but in general, it's the ability to recover from a private key compromise. Right now, as everyone in this room is probably well aware, if you lose your private keys in Bitcoin, your money's gone and it's game over for you. I think this is a really big hurdle to Bitcoin adoption. This is, in my mind, almost as important as scaling transaction throughput is scaling the security that individuals and companies can custody Bitcoin with. Realistically, unless it's easier to hold private keys securely, we're not going to see a billion people holding private keys. And then vaults are a covenant implementation. They're kind of a use case that uses reactive security. And this helps you recover from private key loss. So if it's stolen, a vault owner will notice a trigger transaction, and then they can initiate a sweep to a separate wallet that they control. So I think having this extra layer of defense in custody is a really spectacular use case for covenants. And since it's so tightly defined in OpVault, I am going to go through that one. But it's important to realize that there are, like I said earlier, many ways to make vaults. Rindale over in the other room has a perfect vault. You can use opcat. I'm sure there's many other ways you can make vaults. So this is not the only way to do it. All right, real quick. So OpVault was a proposal by James O'Byrne. It adds two new opcodes, OpVault and OpVault Recover. In the BIP, it is used in conjunction with CTV, which Jeremy just presented on earlier. The TapScript opcodes, OpSuccess 187 and 188, are constrained with the new rules to implement OpVault and OpVault Recover. Just as a quick note, anytime a new opcode is forked in, it uses a set of reserved opcodes that are used for this, and this is what makes it backwards compatible. And right here we have a graph of a basic transaction flow. So over on the left side, we have a user who spends a UTXO into a vault. And then from there, their two options are an unvault transaction, which is that trigger, or they can just sweep it into a separate wallet that they own. And that is only one address that is defined at the beginning. And then after the unvault transaction, after a time delay, then the withdrawal can be finalized. So it's kind of a phased approach, and that's what adds the extra layer of security there. All right, can everyone see this? All right, this is a bit of an involved diagram for OpVault, but as you can see at the top, you have the initial vault construction, the two spend paths that I mentioned earlier, the trigger, and then the recovery path. Those are two tap leaves, so that's where the conditions live. you see at the top, the green one is the vault path, and the blue one is the recovery path. It's also important to point out that there's still the internal pub key. So just with Taproot, you have both a key path spend and a script path spend. Everything in OpVault is happening in the script path spend. But if you want to be sure that it's constrained only to the script path spend, you can choose a nothing up my sleeve point, which is basically an unspendable key path. So you can choose a point on Bitcoin's elliptic curve that has an unknown discrete log, which means no private key that someone can spend with. So that would be one way to constrain it, but you can also use that to put like a very deep cold backup key in there. But for the rest of this, we're just going to talk about the script path part of this. Down on the left is the trigger transaction. So you're taking a vaulted UTXO, you're activating the trigger, and then you have the intermediate stage. So after this, you would be able to spend, but the key mechanism with OpVault is that you pre-specify the format that this intermediate UTXO has to take. And then so if you see here, it still has the recovery path, and then it does use CTV in this diagram to enforce that the UTXO is of the correct format. Over to the right, you have the recovery path, which is available both in the beginning and in the intermediate stage. It does have, the BIP was designed to be compatible with V3 transactions and to use ephemeral anchors for fee bumping, since if you're using a vault for deep cold storage, you probably can't pre-specify the fee rate. So we don't have to spend too much time on that, but it was designed to work with that. And then just lastly at the bottom, you have the withdrawal, and that's when you withdraw the time locked output that follows the format specified in the original vault. All right, and then so we have creating a vault. This is the witness, the script pub key that you spend into. As you can see, the paths, again, the leaves are both the recovery path with the OpVault recover. So I highlighted that since that's one of the opcodes that would be added with this. And then you have the trigger path. And so this is just kind of a more in-depth look at how the trigger path works. The leaf update script body, that can be, you can basically put anything you want in there, because it's up to you to determine what format will be applied to that next UTXO. So it's got lots of options. And you can pretty much put whatever you want in there. All right, and then so this is what it looks like to trigger a withdrawal. At the top you have the witness stack. So this is what would unlock the original output, the OpVault output, and then below that is the output script for that intermediate transaction. So when you're triggering it, I think the most important thing to keep in mind, which is why I highlighted, is that spend delay. So if you see, the recovery path still exists, but then in this new output, the spend delay is really what gives you that extra security. You can choose it to be however long you want, but having that spend delay is really important because that's what gives you time to react. So that's why I highlighted it there. And also you can also include a revault. So when you're spending from a vault, you obviously don't have to spend all of it. You have the option to revault a portion of it into the same construct that you had earlier. All right, and so now I kind of wanted to look at why this is important and how this applies to the real world. I think Bitcoin is going to continue monetizing, and it's going to be used by companies as well as individuals. A lot of the covenants and soft fork proposal debate has been really focused on what does a peer-to-peer transaction between two people look like. While that is clearly important, there are already companies that are using it. It's going to be adopted by nation states. It's going to be adopted by the largest companies in the world, and they enter into complex agreements that individuals don't enter into with each other. And so I really want to drive home the point that the terms of these agreements right now are mainly held in just paper contracts. So custodians will have lots of contracts. And if we see really big Bitcoin adoption coming up soon, they'll probably also be using really, really complicated contracts. You can probably imagine companies like BlackRock will be doing this. So I have here that you can have either like financial agreements by people who are adopting Bitcoin will either be strictly defined in legal contracts because they're using sort of a basic custody setup, or the terms will be trustlessly enforced by Bitcoin in addition to having legal contracts. So if there's one point I think if there's one takeaway from this, I think it's that it's really important to have as much of agreements as possible to be enforced on-chain on Bitcoin. That has the best trust assumptions. It's why everyone loves Bitcoin in the first place. And I think it's important to really realize that right now, a lot of the economic adoption and the economic actors that are using Bitcoin are basically not doing this. All the Bitcoin that is in ETFs and structures like that, the ultimate agreement as to who owns that is right now something that would be settled in courts basically, and not like settled on chain. I mean, obviously the owners of the private keys still control the funds, but I think an important goal for a scaling discussion with covenants, with vaults, with any of this stuff, is to just really get as much as possible, like granularly defined on chain. And then so features like velocity control, spending policies, and layered security, I think dramatically improves Bitcoin's utility as money. I think a lot of Bitcoiners kind of have this notion that the price will magically be in the millions, and then one day they'll just rule the world. I don't think that happens without really improving the utility as base money. So by base money, that means it's going to be the backbone of the global financial system. And with the way that custody and script works right now, I just don't think that it's equipped enough to do that. All right, so I want to sort of do a quick question in the middle here. What does anyone here think is a use case for vaults, both personally or for a company? Does anyone have any?
Recovery?
Yeah, recovery. That's I think a great one. I think it's a huge challenge when people are first getting into Bitcoin. You'll tell anyone that, hey, you should self-custody. You need to hold private keys, but oh, by the way, if you mess it up at all, your money's gone. So I think that recoverability is a great way to sort of onboard people.
Wrap Bitcoin, but without a centralized custodian.
Yeah, that's another good one. So wrap Bitcoin without a centralized custodian. Right now, because of the way script is, it's kind of incentivizing centralized custodians to be doing that service. So that's another good one. Any others?
Social signaling by large entities like ETFs that funds will be locked in a vault for a certain amount of
Yeah, that's another good one. So social signaling. I think that kind of parallels a pretty public example with ETFs. For example, some of the issuers make their on-chain address known. Everyone's going to look at that, and if you have an issuer that's using a vault, and all the other issuers are using legacy address format, I think that's great signaling and also just better security. So I would agree with that. All right, so I think one thing that this. Oh, did you have another?
I had my hand.
Oh, sorry.
I was going to say collateral management.
Oh, really?
That's kind of crazy.
Nice. You.
We talked about that.
Yeah, so I guess you predicted that one. Yeah, so I think right now, a lot of people will analogize Bitcoin to gold. It's base money, and I think collateral management is a great use for vaults. If Bitcoin's going to become the global reserve currency, it's going to be used similarly to the global reserve asset, which is U.S. government bonds right now. Unfortunately, I think people tend to ignore this because they think, government bonds, that's fiat nonsense. It doesn't matter. The reality is that nation states across the world and really everyone uses government debt as a reserve asset, and so I think it's useful for us to keep in mind how those markets work, and realize the possibility that people might try to use Bitcoin in a similar way if it grows to that size. So, and I pointed out that fiat products have no custody risk. It's kind of funny to even say that. It's just a ledger that they control. But right now, there is significant custody risk for Bitcoin. If you lose keys, it's gone. And I think if something is acting as collateral to the global financial system, that kind of risk and worry is unacceptable, and it will frankly hinder adoption. So I think we need stronger on-chain security guarantees if we're going to replace government debt as pristine financial collateral. And then I put in this graphic right here, I have just the daily trading volume from like the New York Fed of reverse repo operations. So that's overnight secured lending and borrowing with government bonds, and it's in the hundreds of billions every day. So I think the main point of this is just that the global reserve asset right now is used for a huge amount of secured lending and borrowing. And if Bitcoin is going to replace it as the reserve asset, we need better on-chain mechanisms to allow it to do those functions. And then so I have another question. If you had to hold $1 trillion of Bitcoin, how would you do it? Would you be comfortable doing that right now? So I would love to hear if anyone has an answer to that. If you had $1 trillion of Bitcoin, what would you do with it? Would you be comfortable with that? What was that?
I'd probably use Sapo.
Zappo? I'm seeing some shaking of people's heads. Anyone? Multisig? Yeah.
Giant multi-sig.
Giant multisig?
I get nervous even using multi-sig for large amounts. So
Yeah, that's totally fair. I mean, using multisig is obviously really powerful, but yeah, it's arguable whether that's approachable for enough people. If you imagine a world where individuals are holding their life savings and massive amounts of wealth personally, and at a scale where hundreds of millions of people are doing that, I think it's impractical to just tell them all to make their own multisig. So that's just a kind of another reason I put this out there. Something like vaults, something with reactive security that improves on-chain security, I think would allow that future. All right, and then here I just have a quick graph of Bitcoin in terms of like the size compared to other global assets. I think this is something that it's important to keep in mind because the big pools, specifically bonds, money, and gold are what Bitcoin seeks to replace as a global store of value. I think people oftentimes dismiss these kind of ideas and act as if Bitcoin has already won. It's certainly on an incredible trajectory and has lots of potential, but like the previous slide mentioned, if Bitcoin is going to claw into these markets and really become the backbone of a global financial system, people have to be aware of how these larger markets work and really try to be practical with how Bitcoin will sort of take over that market share. And that's going to be both companies doing it and individuals. I mentioned that nation states typically hold all of their money in US government bonds. Most people hold, most non-Bitcoiners will hold most of their wealth just in the S&P 500, for example. So I think it's important to keep this in mind when you think about what it looks like for Bitcoin to take over as money. Okay, and then I think another really good use case for vaults are provable time locks. I have this graphic up here of the scary man with the wrench, because the $5 wrench attack is something that people talk about all the time in self-custody. I think a tangible example would be, if someone breaks into your house and demands that you give them Bitcoin, you're likely going to go to a hardware wallet or just an account, and they'll compel you to give it to you. This, by the way, happens more frequently than people might think. Jameson Lopp has been keeping an active track of all these incidences, but I think a vault setup where both the unvault and the recovery path that I mentioned before, if both of those are time locked, then you could provably not be able to give up custody of funds. And so even if you followed an attacker's instructions, you basically would have to do a trigger transaction that could be delayed for up to a week. And you could say, well, time locks are already in Bitcoin, but I think it's kind of impractical. Like right now, most people aren't going to just perpetually time lock their funds to guard them. But if you have something like a vault that requires a trigger transaction and then a predefined period of time, I think that could dramatically reduce the threat to key holders at home. So that would be the individual sort of self-custody scenario. But also, if you think about smaller companies, smaller groups, right now it's not really feasible for a company to have its treasury custodied by like a group of individuals with hardware wallets in their house. But I think if something like vaults gets adopted more, then that could really reduce the incentive for people to basically be $5 rent attacked. And no matter how much that's really happening today, I think it's a constant fear and a constant concern. And when people are thinking about whether or not they can custody Bitcoin themselves, it's something that is likely on people's minds. So if the incentive to perform that attack is lessened, then I think that would just be a huge benefit to all of Bitcoin. And then the last example I wanted to bring up that people also might think is kind of a boring or irrelevant topic is insurance. Right now, the custody insurance market is very small relative to Bitcoin's market cap. There's a company, OSL Digital, that recently announced like a $1 billion insurance policy. Most people believe it to be the biggest. It's frankly pretty hard to find good data. I spent a while trying to find like the size of this market, and basically found that it's so small that it's difficult to know. I think this is important because going back to that sort of graph of relative sizes, there are certain types of companies, types of groups that aren't even going to touch something if it's impossible to insure. But that the National Association of Insurance Commissioners currently considers Bitcoin uninsurable. And I put a container ship there because really a lot of things that are large scale and important for economies to do, like buildings, like shipping things on containers, those are all involved in insurance and reinsurance markets. I think that risk sharing is a really important part of capital formation and an economy. I think Bitcoiners can't really write that off. If Bitcoin is going to be global money and truly adopted, then I think similar markets will have to form. And I think vaults kind of would really help that to become a possibility, and make custody like kind of an insurable activity. And it might sound goofy, but I think that is important and would grow adoption. And that's it. And yeah, so any questions?
The last point.
Yeah.
What makes the current state of multi-sigs and vaults not insurable?
I guess the question is what makes the current state of multi-sigs for vaults like not insurable. I think right now it's just because it's kind of too nascent, like in terms of it requires a really good setup. I think there's not many companies that are. I think there's one actually, I guess, that's doing multi-party like shared custody with multi-sig, but I think the short answer is just that it's hard to do and people aren't doing it. Yeah, and I think the closing thought I wanted to say was that something like vaults or things that improve people's ability to custody will simultaneously improve companies' ability and individuals' ability to do custody, and I think also sort of shrink the size of companies. You could have 2 or 3 people have the same security as like a nation state. And I think as proof of this, there's probably people at this conference whose self-custody setup is more secure than like a TradFi bank. I think that's incredible, and that's something that we need to further with script improvements.
Rock on. Thanks, Sean.
Cool.